Thanks everybody for joining today's PRCA talk. We're looking forward to discussing travel and tourism sector communications recovery strategies, creative thinking and plan Bs for second waves should they come about based on what the current news is saying about different countries and so on, particularly Spain and other points in the UK. Don't forget to tweet. We've set out a poll on Twitter on the PRCA handle, which has been provided to you on in this chat as well, and also use the hashtag PRCA Travel to keep the conversation going. Should you have any questions, please feel free to fire them over at any point in the chat or via Twitter as well. So a little bit more about the panel. I'm Frank Marr. I'm from AM+A Marketing Media Relations, and I'm delighted to be joined by Dominik and Viet. I myself co-founded an agency 10 years ago this August, so watch this space for a big party. Prior to that, I was based in South Korea teaching and designing English courses. AMA represent a range of clients and destinations who include Poland, Slovenia, Czech tourism, a number of regions in the UK. A bamboo bicycle club, along with quite a few food and drink businesses as well. We've won some interesting awards over the years. We've tried to position ourselves quite heavily in sustainable, environmental and social mobility within PR. We also have Dominik is joining us from collab-ed. Collab-ed. Hello, Dom. collab-ed is a tourism management and communications organization. Dominik began his PR career in Germany back in 2008 with one of the world's leading theme parks, Europa Park. He quickly progressed to head of public relations, which saw him responsible for developing and managing the implementation of Europa Park's communication strategy. Fundamental to sustaining the company's position as a global market leader in the leisure industry was his international campaign, which we're looking forward to hearing about later, and agency management, alignment of digital and traditional media strategies. Stakeholder relations, including third-party partnerships, included Vodafone, Mercedes-Benz, Coca-Cola, and Siemens. In 2015, Dominik co-founded his current agency, an award-winning international creative agency based in London. His clients range from airports, airlines, tourism boards to attractions. And then our final speaker, we have Viet, who operates between London and New York. Viet co-founded and is the CEO of a luxury lifestyle agency, Issa PR, and recently launched Subculture as well, one of PR Week's top 10 agencies to watch in 2020. Founded in 2014. Sorry, Viet, did you say something? No. Founded in 2014, Issa PR has worked with some of the world's iconic brands, including Absolute, Vogue Italia, Fendi, Hyatt, The Edition, Def Jam Records, Warner Brothers Records, BMW, and so on. She was named as New York Business Journal's Woman of the Year in 2018 and has been involved in several philanthropy and pro bono campaigns for the United Nations START. So with that, how's everyone going? How's everyone doing today? And are you seeing green shoots of recovery at the moment?
I'll let the lady begin. Ladies first.
Yeah. How are you today? And are you seeing green shoots of recovery at the moment?
Yeah, so thanks, Frank. We're excited to speak to everybody today. I think obviously the last few months has probably been unexpected and challenging in some ways for many people. But I think over the last month, 6 weeks certainly, we're seeing a lot more activity, and we're seeing some changes in terms of business recovery, and so it'd be great to talk today about some of the marketing and communication strategies that we should all discuss and be aware of from this point forward.
And Dom, how are you doing? Are you seeing a bit of green and much recovery at the moment?
Slowly, yes, but I think it's a very dynamic situation for all of us and everybody we work with. We do, as an agency, specialize in intercultural and like more international communications, meaning that most of our clients are not actually based in the UK. And that just gives it an extra layer of complication, often because we have to monitor travel restrictions and the newest travel advice. And then, as we all know, and just noticed now over the weekend with suddenly new quarantine plans being implemented for Spain, it all can happen really, really quickly. And I think part of what we are going to discuss today will be how do we respond to these quick and sudden changes, and how can we adapt our strategies in order to be as responsive as we have to be in this current situation.
Absolutely. Thank you. So as we discussed earlier, the three key points that we feel are the most appropriate things to talk about in this current situation with uncertainty on how PRs move forward, and the turbulence within the tourism sector. The three key points we'll be talking about today are PR frameworks, crisis communications and response checklist. Viet and Dom both have some brilliant experience working for large agencies and one of Europe's largest tourism attractions as well, in terms of crisis communications and strategies behind that. We'll then go on to talk about creative thinking and recovery plans, as easy as recovery plans are right now when there are talks of second and third waves. And finally, we'll look at plan Bs and situational planning. What happens if we all go into lockdown again, and what do we do about that? So I suppose the first question, we'll start with Dom this time round. Over the past 3 months, what kind of activities have you been doing in terms of when it all kicked off, and how quickly were you to react to everything? What kind of tactics did you carry out?
I think, like many of us, first of all, we were almost overwhelmed, because it was such a new situation. Obviously, we are so heavily invested in tourism that and that was one of the sectors that was first hit by the results and the implementations of this pandemic. So it needed a really good think first, and to really understand the situation, which I think we're still in the process of understanding the situation. And then that really quickly went over to, okay, so what do we have to do to actually be able to provide a safe experience to the customers? So we work with clients and trying to figure that out. What does that mean for our operation? And then how do we make our product, our destination safe? And how can we really work with authorities to align all of our measures and to be compliant with what they tell us to do in order to be safe? And then obviously out of that comes the communication strategy. So I think very importantly to note in that situation is that unless you've got your product right and you've got your destination sorted out, there's not necessarily even a point starting to think about much of a strategy, because ultimately your potential customer, your client, your consumer will be quite scared and insecure. Like, what does that mean? Can I be on a plane? Can I travel to a foreign country? Is a theme park safe to visit with all of the people there? And unless you can teach and educate them why and what you have changed, I think there's no point communicating anything much. So we've been working on understanding how the products become safe, and then we managed to put that into communication strategies to send that out to the wider world and our clients and consumers.
And in terms of making the product safe, what was that process? Was there a lot of research carried out beforehand, and then coming up with the overarching what the organization is doing and communicating out? How did you go about doing that?
So I think Viet is going to touch on that later on when we talk about crisis comms probably. Very important part will be your relationships with the authorities and with the people who are actually going to tell you in such a situation what you have to do. So talking about Europa Park as a case study, they set up task forces who liaise directly with the local government, with the authorities, and they made sure that everything that was changed in line with the actual current guidelines. And then obviously that will change on an almost weekly or so basis going forward. So anything from limiting visitor numbers on a day to changing the way we sell tickets, i.e. you can now only come if you've pre-booked a ticket for a specific date. You can't rock up in the morning and expect to get in because it might be full. One-way system throughout the entire park, which is about almost 100 hectares. So we're talking.
We'll go on to the later strategies a bit later on. But in terms of how you reacted and so on, what came first before these policies?
Nothing really, because we could only really react. Well, first of all, we communicated the park is closed and we won't open until further notice, because that was the guideline at the time. And then it was about when can we open and how. So we had to establish all of the measures that had to be implemented. And then we needed to tell people about what we had done and how they could now come and visit. And that's then when really, I think the topic here begins. Because obviously all the organizational, operational parts of the job, they're not done by us as a creative agency. That's done on site by the professionals and experts. But it's then our job to get all of these measures together and then transport that information out into the world. And that happens through all of your basic media outlets. That happens in form of a press release. That happens in forms of videos that were created specifically to show people what's happening. Social media is super important just because it's a very quick medium and you can update information very regularly and constantly and talk directly to your consumers. And then obviously the website where we have Q&A pages, special landing pages just on the topic of COVID-19 and so forth. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll go on to that a little bit later. We're going to go on to Viet now. But in terms of, there's a bit of an operational wait to see how they went about, and then it was in terms of strategic partnerships and communication from once the operation.
Yeah. As I said it before, I think it's very important that your product is right before you start to tell everybody to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and Viet, over the past 3 months, what kind of activities have you been up to? You're obviously doing a lot more with the state side, the US markets and so on. And so you might have experienced a slightly later wave, and did it help being in the UK? So overloaded question. Let's start with what have you been up to in the last 3 months? What kind of activities?
First of all, so my agency, Issa PR, so we do travel and luxury and other sectors from art, fashion, music. And so some of the things, of course, that we have experienced, given that COVID has been one of the biggest global catastrophes of the modern era, is that, of course, our communication strategies and a lot of the implementation and activation has significantly changed. So I'm sure many people on this call will also empathize that we haven't been able to do events or press trips, given social distancing, given the cases and deaths taking place around the world. A lot of different brands and organizations have had to really change what they're doing. And so over the last 3 months, what we've seen a rise in is, of course, content and digital. That is key. Obviously, while everyone is social distancing, there are hundreds of millions of people around the world consuming news and information on their phone. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of is strategic partnerships. Again, because people are limited and restricted to going out, a lot of brands and companies are doing really interesting and newsworthy partnerships, whether it's within the sector or outside the sector, because they're creating stories and narratives to be able to communicate to consumers in a way that they can keep in touch with them, even if they can't travel to a different country, visit their favorite restaurant, go on to their favorite airline, for example. And so there's been a marked change and difference in how we operate and how we've had to move very quickly and nimbly to meet the crises of the world that we're all going through today. And I think on this call, we'll be discussing various different things that other brands have done, which could be inspirational or aspirational, and how we can really help to address this global crisis in communications and marketing moving forward.
Excellent. So going on to that a little bit, Dom, you mentioned frameworks and some from Europa Park, but Europa Park did start a little bit earlier. So are you able to share a bit more of a case study of how Germany reopened and communicated what it was doing, particularly with its largest tourist attraction?
Yeah, I think in a way Germany was up until now, so just looking at numbers, it seems to have handled it reasonably well. I mean, if you look at the infections and unfortunately the death, then they're quite a bit below a lot of other European countries. But that always, I think, bore the danger of maybe thinking we can open too early. And it wasn't the government's intention to do that at all. So they were at the beginning really cautious, and it was a kind of waiting game for the entire industry. What then kind of happened with Europa Park, because they're quite a big player in the regional southwest market of Germany, is they managed to almost establish themselves as a thought leader and like an actual kind of best practice case. So what we've seen now throughout Europe, actually, where other bigger theme parks have now opened, many of them have touched on the forms of communications and the kind of content that Europa Park developed about a couple of months ago almost, and kind of follow in those footsteps. So work with a lot of video content, like educational videos. How do you now board a roller coaster, for example, because it's a slightly different process. Wear a mask, and where do you have to wear a mask, and many other factors. And that obviously being a big place, there's on-site hotels, so that helps to create then a kind of framework for smaller hotels in the region. And then they have actually Europa Park have been very open in sharing all of their learnings and using their kind of market power to also enable smaller players in the market to benefit from their expertise and to implement their strategies as well, which I think was a really nice thing to do. In comms altogether, it's something that you can communicate really, really well, right? Like you're doing a good thing, you're helping other industry peers out in that way. And that was actually one thing that we managed to leverage throughout the communications of this reopening process.
And in terms of reopening and promotion and so on, what kind of tactics have been implemented for that then, since they've, there's been clarity, this is how you've got to go about visiting and so on?
That has also really changed with, I think, everybody who's selling some sort of a ticketed attraction, any theaters who unfortunately are still not much wiser than a month ago on how they will be able to reopen. Everything has to change, because we went at Europa Park from about like a 50,000 visitors a day capacity down to maybe only 15 or 20,000. So we weren't exactly sure how hard should we push so that we can sell out our daily limit of tickets, but without disappointing all too many people, because there are no tickets available anymore. So it was a slow kind of learning process. It kind of easing in. We're using all of the traditional outlets, like there's ads in magazines and out of home. We use a lot of social media because we can target it really well. We use traditional PR, press releases. If we do things like helping out industries, we try to talk about it. But yeah, at the end of the day, it was a more kind of cautious approach to marketing the new season than it would have been otherwise.
Okay. So it's more in terms of promotion at the moment, just educational messaging on how you can go about Europa Park and what the restrictions are.
At the end of the day, for us, it's to re-establish the trust and the feeling of safety for visitors. It's a proper family product. The last thing you want is anyone to come and be anxious about catching a virus. So we need to tell people what we did and make sure that they know that we did everything we can to make the park and the product as safe as possible. And that's what we need to rely to people, and that's what we want them to know.
And moving forward with Europa Park in terms of the future framework, is that the current strategy? At what point do you feel they'll be moving on to become more commercial, or is there no current talk about that?
It's a strange again situation. It'll happen as we go. If there's any new developments in terms of travel advice, for example, then everything might change all of a sudden, because maybe even, God forbid, there's another like shutdown of the entire park, for example. So at the moment, we're preparing for all of these eventualities. We've got the crisis comms plans in the drawers that we can pull it out and tell everybody what's going to happen now. But until then, we'll just monitor how sales go. And if we need to push a little bit harder, we will, but we've got the summer holidays up. I mean, people want to slowly but surely try and have days out again. So at the moment, we will stick with kind of an educational and encouraging messaging, but we're still being cautious because we're aware of the severity of the situation.
So preparation and reactionary tactics at the moment.
That goes on behind the scenes, yeah, definitely.
And so, Viet, talking about frameworks and so on, are there any particular types of communications, PR frameworks that you would recommend for organisations moving forward, who are slightly starting to beat the curve and so on, particularly in Europe?
Yeah, I think it's really important just to understand what the communications framework is first. And the communications framework can be made up of several different parts. So the first thing I would say is communicating safety to guests. That's going to be the number one most important thing. That should really be everywhere, front and center of all your messaging on all of your different platforms, whether it is your website, social media, and so forth, because you want to make sure that your guests and visitors and so forth feel that they are safe, and if they return to a country or a restaurant, that they will be cared for in a very critical and important way. The second thing is really communicating what the key measures are going to be that every business and organization is going to take. So whether, for example, Emirates had offered COVID testing before getting on to a plane. A lot of restaurants right now are removing 50% of the tables and chairs to ensure that there is social distancing within a restaurant, or putting out new tables outside a restaurant so that there is more safety if you're dining with a partner or groups of people. So I think really articulating what the measures are that you're taking will be really important in any communication, and really all external communication. The third thing is tone of voice. So of course, every brand and organization has a specific personality and DNA. So making sure that you're able to communicate in either a warm, friendly way. If you have more of a corporate identity, to make sure you stay true and authentic to that, and just making sure that in your tone of voice, you're really demonstrating your commitment to the safety and health and well-being of visitors and guests. And I think the fourth thing just to consider, and this applies probably only to a handful of different brands, but if you're a hotel that's part of a bigger hotel group, whether it's Hyatt, Hilton, Marriott and so forth, or you're a smaller operator but you have a parent company, then try to tap into the legacy and heritage of that bigger organization, because there's a lot of trust that has been built over the last few decades, and so having that will also help to alleviate some fears and also strengthen your communication with consumers and visitors as well. So I think before you obviously embark on any kind of recovery strategy or creative plan, understand that given the unprecedented time that we live in today, there are some really important tenets of communication that everyone should have in all of their external messaging from this point forward.
Excellent.
Yeah, just to touch on that really quick, because I think that's a really, really good point you just made with use the history. So with not just Europa Park, but other travel clients and especially destinations, what we've actually seen, and that happens a lot on social media, is almost like forming a stronger bond between the brand destination and the customers, the visitors. There was a lot of sympathy. There was a lot of understanding. Everybody is saying, like, if you need more time to open safely, then we really appreciate that's what's going to happen. We're sad that our trip had to be cancelled because you weren't quite open already, but we'd much rather you actually take the time and prepare properly and tell us what's happening, and then maybe we'll come later in the year or next year. So using these relationships and almost using your fan base and your followers as a kind of advocate for your brand as well, by having them on your side, is really important. And that's something that often shows a lot stronger in the time of a crisis. So people actually come together.
Yeah. So in terms of helping build consumer confidence and maintaining brand reminders, how important is it for organizations to stay on brand whilst maintaining a shift in narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, as I mentioned before, it's critical to change the narrative because we're adapting to a very an unprecedented situation that nobody has been in before. But I think it's really important to always stay true to the brand and your heritage and your legacy. If you're talking about, if you release a reactive or holding statement, which is part of your crisis comm strategy in a completely different voice, then you lose the connection and authenticity with people. Of course, it's really important to underscore, safety, health, precautions, measures, and so forth. But you should do that in a way that's, quite true to you as well. So probably, with Virgin Atlantic, for example, Richard Branson obviously is known for being, very kind of colorful character. And you wouldn't expect him to make any jokes and so forth. But Virgin Atlantic has a very specific way of communicating versus British Airways. EasyJet, for example, some people in London may have seen that as part of them restarting in their flights in June and July, they released a lot of out-of-home advertising, so a lot of posters at bus stops and so forth. And they had actually a really clever slogan and call to action. So they had highlighted the word Europe, but they changed it, so it was kind of a bit of a pun. They changed it to European, so they added obviously, the N at the end, and so they were kind of communicating something in a fun, cheeky way, but signifying that obviously a lot of markets in Europe were open again to travel. So I think there's something really important about maintaining that dialogue and making sure that your loyal, fan base and also probably new clients and new customers, they, respect you for your communication strategies. They, believe you, they trust what you're saying. And then as part of that, you can really build a stronger, following, because I think in crises, that's often a time to really prove yourself and prove, your commitment to, the company's values as well.
Yeah, and obviously it's not always about trying to be doom and gloom in terms of when it comes to digital marketing and so on. Has anybody set a kind of narrative when it comes to social media and so on? Dom, you're dealing a lot with digital marketing. Have you got any tips on particular narratives moving forward on what social media communication should be doing?
Again, I think it's hard to say, first of all, as like a blanket rule, I think, because there's going to be very many different destinations and different sized companies who are in very different shoes. One campaign we're actually just preparing for a launch of next week for Europa Park, who I'm just using as a case study a lot because they're so you can kind of go into a hotelier or F&B or anything and it'll happen there. So it's quite a useful case study. But we're with the theming of the park, which happens to be Europe. So there's 15 European themed areas within that one park. We're going to use that as a play on see all of Europe in one place. So obviously limit your travel and you can still do a round trip in Europe. Now that's something that can work really well in that very specific case, but is obviously no use to anyone else who doesn't happen to have a European theme park as their product. So yeah, it's a difficult one. We're working with a few other smaller clients and we're trying to figure out which exact way do we want to go, because oftentimes you'll see that what happens in the UK now, actually, if everybody books a staycation all of a sudden, then our hotels here in the UK are suddenly filling up rather quickly. And we might get to a point where, you may only have to focus on the domestic market, for example, to be able to fill your beds. I've just looked at our Twitter poll, actually, and a solid third say start marketing, but only domestically. And that can work really, really well for some. And
yeah, just to let everybody know, there's a Twitter poll going on at the moment. Please do have a look at it. And as Dom said, it's looking quite even.
I've taken that away from the end now, but I find it just quite interesting. So we are, as an agency, we're actually in a difficult situation because most of our clients are, as I said at the beginning, non-UK based, whereas we are. So for us, this might be a slightly different situation. So maybe Viet's got a couple of examples, especially being based in 2 markets as well, where she's got a couple of examples on how her clients and she with her clients deals with the marketing right now.
Yeah, from our perspective, our agency perspective, we've focused a lot on educating our clients about what's going on in the region and cultural aspects and education aspects. We've done some really good strategic partnerships as well with publishers. We did a series of book competitions and worked closely with the publisher. But yeah, I think education in terms of the narrative has been really important to warming people back up to the clients as well. But yeah, Viet, any final thoughts on narrative communications, whether it's with journalists or digitally, before we move on to crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think digitally and social media is an amazing platform in terms of being able to communicate in real time and share things, both good and bad. So, you know, on a positive front, you know, communicating when you know, an organization or business is reopening, communicating some of these measures we discussed about, communicating, you know, positive things, whether there are offers or incentives or, you know, reasons why to visit. On a, you know, less positive front, but really important and quite critical. I'm sure many people on this call have heard about some, you know, maybe pubs or hospitality venues that have reopened, and then, you know, someone has been reported to have a case, and then, you know, the establishment, whether it's pub or restaurant, has closed down. And actually, you know, I've seen a lot of people using social media to communicate to those customers to say, you know, we're reaching out to everybody who was at, you know, this pub on this day to let them know that someone had contracted, you know, COVID, and, you know, they may need to go into 14-day quarantine and so forth. So social media, of course, is a very, very powerful thing to use. In terms of narratives, very quickly, you know, as mentioned before, we do travel, we also do lifestyle. And so it's really important to see what brands are doing really across the board, so we don't operate in a silo, and we're taking inspiration and you know, good leadership and practice from other different sectors and organizations. But to start on travel first, before I actually set up my agency, I was with Edelman for a decade, and some of you will know that Edelman is the #1 largest international firm in the world. And so I had worked on both travel and lifestyle there. Some of the travel clients included the Empire State Building, running that account globally for 5 years. And we did a lot of tourism with Puerto Rico and Peru. And we also did a big tourism campaign for the US Department of Commerce after 9/11. And so, of course, after 9/11, you know, there was a lot of people and markets around the world who were very cautious and didn't want to travel to the US for different reasons. And so part of their narrative actually was to try and educate, inspire, and connect with people again by showcasing they had an advertising campaign that really showcased the best of the US, and they leveraged film and entertainment to do that. And so the advertising campaign, the strapline was, "You've seen the film, now visit the set." Some of you may remember this ad campaign. So they would have clips of, you know, King Kong to highlight New York. They would have clips from Jurassic Park to highlight Hawaii. They had clips from The Last of the Mohicans to highlight North Carolina, you know, Rocky and Philadelphia. And so as part of their narrative, actually, they wanted to bring nostalgia and bring inspiration back to people, to encourage them to want to travel to the US. And then they also communicated, you know, how they were going to, you know, welcome guests in a very friendly way. And so I think there's a lot of different things and learnings that we can take from across the board, whether it is our own sector or looking, you know, beyond that. And probably later I'll share some lifestyle examples when we talk about creativity for other clients.
Excellent. So moving on, just let everybody know we do have a Twitter poll. Please do vote on it. Go on the PRCA Twitter handle, and you can see it there. It's pretty close at the moment, and it's not a bad sign for the PR sector that the industry is favouring getting back and encouraging people to travel. But quickly, there's obviously lots of talk about second waves, third waves, and so on. Which is a communication challenge in terms of if it does come, if it doesn't come. And, you know, there's clearly elements of important crisis communications, strategies, preparation, and so on that is required. Viet, do you have any tips on what PRs, what organizations need to be doing when it comes to preparing for situations such as a second wave? And
so obviously I spoke briefly earlier about the communications framework, but I think really looking at, the crisis comm strategy is really important as well. And at Edelman, I was there for over a decade working on various different, clients. Part of the crisis strategy is really important, and this really pertains to second wave. But every brand and client and organization should really make sure that they focus a lot on what their crisis and issues comm strategy is. And so the number one part of dealing with a crisis is making sure you're prepared as much as you possibly can. And as part of that, every client should really have developed, a Q&A document, frequently asked questions document. You probably should have already set up an org chart with regards to a chain of command with, in terms of who is the top person who you can reach at any time to discuss the crisis. Everyone's mobile phone number should be on there. And there should also be a hierarchy in terms of who can make the final decision if there's a crisis in terms of what you should do. In the what you should do part is obviously thinking about, a reactive statement. Reactive statements are often issued when something, major has happened. And so in the past, I've also worked on aviation clients like Boeing Aerospace and Continental Airlines. And there was also an airline called EOS Airlines that was the first luxury or business class carrier. And so, in the aviation industry, if there's a plane crash, if there is, something faulty with the airplane, and even with the tourism destination, if there is a big, catastrophe, if there's a terrorist attack and so forth, there are a lot of things that you need to do as part of your communication strategy to talk to people. And so having the holding statement, knowing who is going to be the spokesperson, knowing what the chain of command is, making sure that people are available 24/7. In a crisis and issue, and then making sure that you have already developed quite a robust Q&A so that you can obviously check approved answers that have been agreed and messaging that's been agreed with the organization in advance.
And have you done anything recently in terms of preparing in case of a second wave with your clients?
Yeah, what we've actually done is we've pivoted strategy a lot in terms of focusing more on different elements of the activation. I mentioned before, focusing on digital and content, social media, working with influencers, and also, just kind of looking at, other strategic partnerships. But in terms of travel and tourism, we have certainly advised some clients about what they should be doing when they reopen, how they should communicate to people quickly, efficiently, and with care. And we've also outlined ways in which, if there is a crisis and there is a second wave, that you obviously need to, take the right steps to either close down an organization or business temporarily, but communicate to people via, social e-newsletters and so forth. And then, of course, the reopening strategy is really important as well, because the clients want to know that you can then communicate to people in 2 weeks or a month that you'll be reopening. And as part of that, you've taken all of these different measures to, truly sanitize everything. Maybe you're taking temperatures of people before they go into a venue. Maybe you're taking down, everyone's email address to make sure that if there is another outbreak, that you can efficiently contact people to notify them that, unfortunately, there has been a case in the establishment. So I think we've talked about some of these, measures during the call, and we've done, of course, the same thing with our clients too.
Yeah. So it's been a time for PRs to be very agile, flexible, and having to adapt pretty quickly as well. It's been an interesting time working in the industry, particularly in tourism. I think everybody has adapted really well during this time. But moving on to that, organizations, particularly in the hardest hit sectors such as tourism, tour operators, they've had revenues pretty much dry up overnight and so on. And the need to adapt what their product proposition is has had to happen quite quickly. What do you feel PR's roles are when it comes to organizations adapting new product models? What do you feel is the PR has to do in that case?
I think we oftentimes I think we should be expected, and rightly so, to have a reasonably good understanding of what's happening in our market, right? So you had earlier said, like, it's important not to think in your own silo only, but to actually take inspiration and gather information also from other industries and other sectors. And I think we should have a reasonably good understanding of what is happening. What's the tone out on social media at the moment? How do people talk about reopening pubs, and in what way do we reopen them? How do people feel about traveling and going on holidays? And then by knowing what kind of sentiment is out in the world and in our key markets as such, I think we can help and educate the people who are then actually implementing processes of the fears that people may have before they come to actually visit your destination or stay in your hotel or eat in your restaurant. So we can definitely, I think, feed back and get some insights from just knowing our market really well.
I think the need for technology as well, and understanding the opportunities behind online commerce that connect to digital marketing and social media has been quite important as well.
Yeah, I think,
what are your thoughts?
So important, just given obviously the uncertainty that we are living in every single day, and obviously, you know, the role of the PR is to really advise strategically and creatively their clients what they should be doing. And so what I've seen in the last 4 months or so is, for the first 2 months when COVID broke out, and obviously this became a huge global issue, a lot of brands within the sector we're talking about, as well as lifestyle, a lot of communication strategies really centered around how organizations could help during COVID. And so, people know that, JetBlue offered free flights to, care workers, various different hotels, particularly in London, had, offered massively discounted rates for care workers to go and spend a night to sleep and recover before, a hospital shift. And, even lifestyle brands were doing a lot of that. So one of our clients, Warner Music, obviously knowing that people wouldn't be able to travel to Coachella and Lollapalooza and other music festivals, what they decided to do was they had a weekend where they televised the best performances by their artists. So Bruno Mars, Dua Lipa, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Lizzo. And so they created a 3-day virtual festival, so people could, watch these great performances from the comfort of their home. But as part of that, they asked people to donate, some money that then was given to the World Health Organization to then give back to people and victims and others who may be suffering from it. So I think having a pulse on what's happening in the world, making sure you handle things with real sensitivity, given obviously the death toll and the fact it has severely ravaged so many different economies and countries around the world, and just making sure that PRs give the right advice, whether that is having a brain trust at your PR organization, or understanding what's happening in the world and making sure that you're giving the right feedback. Because the other side of a crisis is, you can make things worse if you don't say or do things in the right way. So you have to be so careful when you, approach these things. So make sure you obviously talk to your senior team and agency first as well.
And I think transparency in this sector has never ever been so important to keep customers up to date and everything. How do people think the airline sector has done, for example, and are there any better than others? Obviously,
we do work with an airline. We work with Eurowings, and it became clear. That's actually one point I would like to add to what Viet just said. There's lots of things you can do to make things better and help, and there's a lot of things that you can do very wrong. Also, I think really important to understand is that different sizes of organizations have very different kind of possibilities in terms of what they can do, not least financially, because quite frankly, a lot of small tourism businesses will struggle to even make it through this crisis. So maybe their last thing on their mind is, right, what's my next PR strategy or marketing strategy going to be? They're just trying to see how can I get my staff through these next 4 or 5 months. So there's going to be, again, different approaches, and there's really, I think, small and easy, simple things you can do, which is just trying to touch on maybe your heritage and try and keep your clients and customers on board, like send out the odd motivational picture, an update what's happening with the team or the staff. How are you making progress to getting the hotel or the restaurant ready to open up again? And just be there still. Don't just entirely disappear because there's nothing to tell at the moment because maybe you're shut, but still ensure your clients and your customers that you are here still and you will be there at the end of all of that. So keep communications going, but be smart and very kind of like listen to the sentiment out there. Don't just go, yeah, start book now because I've cleaned my hotel top to bottom so you can come back. Like be aware of the fears of people out there still. I think that is an important thing because I'm not sure people who listen in maybe like how big their clients are or maybe they're even a PR for a small hotel themselves. So just to understand that there's lots of different levels of things to do.
Yeah, I definitely think I will agree with a short-term strategy and a longer-term vision. I've seen different brands do different things as well. And so, you know, for example, you know, Norwegian just started sending out emails and encouraging people to book for next year. You know, Swatch, which is more of a lifestyle, you know, watch company, they, funnily enough, in the last couple of months have been running a promotion to win, to give consumers the opportunity to win their dream holiday next year, not this year. And so, you know, there are some short-term and long-term things to do. I think what Dom said about, you know, continuing to communicate to your, you know, guests and, you know, visitors and so forth, that's really important. And you can communicate in, you know, a number of different ways about a number of different things. But to Frank's point about what the airline
yeah, I totally went off that, but let's go back to airlines.
Yeah, so that's okay. I'm reeling it back. So with regards to aviation and airlines, so I've definitely seen airlines do different things as well. So I mentioned the first thing that JetBlue did was offer free flights to care workers. The first thing Emirates did was communicate to people that they were going to do COVID testing before any of their passengers got onto flights. And then we talked about, you know, what EasyJet had done as part of their reopening strategy. And so, you know, that was very true to them being, you know, cheeky, playful fun. Some of the others were really looking after, you know, and looking at their, you know, passengers and flyers to make sure that they retain business. So obviously Emirates, you know, leading carrier, and they operate, you know, a lot of, you know, business travel as well as consumer travel. But, you know, a lot of their money is from, you know, business travel to a lot of these lucrative destinations. And so for them, it was really about reassuring and, you know, showing that their passengers that it was safer to fly on the plane. So they should continue buying their business class and first class tickets. And so I think, you know, all brands need to discuss and decide what's important to them. But I think from a culturally sensitive perspective, the first step is obviously, you know, how can you help perhaps the bigger, you know, cause. You know, L'Oreal had committed to donating millions of euros to help buy and produce hand sanitizer that they then put in all of their you know, factories, included in their supply chain and so forth. And then I think, you know, now that we're a little bit further down the road, hopefully to recovery, now is the time to think about, you know, creative strategies and how to really get people back in new and unique and interesting ways.
Excellent. And it's interesting to see train companies not trying to push for a bit of a greater space in the area in the market as well. But there's growth opportunities, I imagine, with trains. The Guardian's been covering it quite a lot and so on as well. But yeah, there's some opportunities for cleaner forms of travel. Just finally, and then we're going to go to our audience super quick because we're very out of time. We're going to look at plan Bs in the future very, very fast. So you literally got a sentence each. And then if the audience have any questions, please send them in. If not, we'll be finishing on the hour. But what future PR and marketing methods should be considered to help organizations shift with the times?
I mean, I think in terms of plan B, you know, let's talk about, you know, best case scenario, worst case scenario. The plan B for, you know, second wave, if people are being, you know, reinfected, if there are more cases, if, you know, countries are shutting down their borders and banning Brits from going to Spain, which is obviously sad news for everyone going to Ibiza. But, you know, we have to make sure as part of plan B, you go back to plan A, you know, what's your crisis strategy? What's the communications framework? How are you going to, you know, communicate your messages safely to get people back? But then on the positive side, plan B, looking at the creativity side of things, how do you inspire someone to want to come back to your restaurant or hotel and so forth. Think about new and different things. Think about, creating really cool digital content series. Alexander McQueen right now is doing 2 content series on Instagram. One is called McQueen Nature and one is McQueen Creators, and they're encouraging people to submit, artwork or pictures or drawings that they have done of nature, because Alexander McQueen was inspired by nature. Whereas, other clients might be doing things in terms of strategic partnerships. A lot of art galleries, for example, right now that we work with in the US, MoMA, Guggenheim, LACMA, The Broad, Getty Museum, they're doing a lot of digital things, including, talks with curators, podcasts, music recommendations. And so these are all great things to keep in touch with people and keep their brand front and center. So I think, that innovation is a really important part of Plan B on the positive side.
Awesome. Dominik, any future PR?
Yes, basically all said, like use technology, anything that's out there. A big new thing, virtual reality obviously opens lots of doors. You can have virtual reality home viewings now, for example, for estate agents, where you look at your potential new purchase house digitally, and a lot of that can be done with the art world. A lot of that can be done in music. But I think at the end of the day, and maybe it's my hope more than anything, I still think people will seek this actual experience. They want to be there themselves, and they want to feel the wind in their hair when they ride a roller coaster, or the bass going through their body as they're at a gig. And so I just think we all need to be a little bit patient for now. Keep communicating and keep reinstalling this level and this trust and feeling of security and safety in our customers. And then hopefully one day we will all be able to experience our favorite hobbies and tourism destinations again.
I think it's an exciting time for hybrid situations with people with tangible moments, as well as people zooming in from all over the world as well. I think the world can become more connected than ever before.
I will just say a quick point as Frank's going through the Q&A from the audience and attendees, but VR actually is an amazing tool to use. And at the agency at Issa, we actually launched the United Nations, the UN's very first ever augmented reality campaign, the World Food Programme, one of the organizations within the UN umbrella. And part of that was really, to show, donors and, people and stakeholders and business leaders that, this is what life is like in, Syria or, a third world country, etc. So they use their augmented reality to transport people to, these different destinations, so we could see what it was really like there. And so with VR, this is a tip for, PR pros on the call, but more of a lifestyle example. But the Japanese sneaker brand Axis, or the trainer company, they recently did a press unveil for 3 of their new trainers by VR. So they sent all the journalists an Oculus Rift, and they sent a device so they can actually do 360 tours of the sneaker. So again, other creative ideas that we can
uncharted territory VR. We're doing a little bit with a VR social media platform, which will be interesting. But it's a fascinating.
But it's necessary, and even like the art shows like Art Basel and Frieze, I'm sure many people know they've all been cancelled, and so a lot of these institutions are doing things online for now while they can, and while they bring people back.
Right, so we're tight on time, so sorry to interrupt, Viet. We have a question from the audience, and just looking at the quick poll in terms of should PRs and marketers now start encouraging people to travel again, and we're looking at a pretty 32% yes, 32% no, and then 35% yes, but the domestic market only. So I'm sure it differs country to country depending on case numbers and so on, but it's quite a inconclusive poll, similar to the situation from the government half the time. Okay, so we have a question from Lorraine. Has print direct mail become more relevant as people are more captive at home and oversaturated with digital noise?
I mean, I think actually that even though that platform method of communication is really important, everything really is being done digitally now. So there are, as restaurants and hotels are opening, there are emails from like the CEO with a comment. There are emails from restaurants saying we're now open, come back. And so I think Amy's point on the next question about PR budget. It's also very expensive to do direct mail.
First one first, and then we can.
Yeah, but the point is, it's very expensive to do print and direct mail, and so I would still recommend digital communications, but maybe try and make it stand out. So maybe have some really amazing graphics, try and capture people even on social media and so forth, because people are really looking for immediate information as soon as possible.
I disagree to a certain extent, because the target audience is my grandparents. I'm sure would prefer something in print and so on, and this very large 60+ audience. Obviously, it's not as environmentally friendly, but I think with comms and marketing, how you get the messaging across to people.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Actually, it depends on your target audience entirely. Like, if you want to reach a young audience who've not picked up a letter or a print magazine in the last 3 years, they probably still won't pick up a print magazine or open a direct mail letter now. Whereas if your target audience is a little bit older and used to that kind of way to communicating to them, then surely that still works. But yeah, bear in mind the cost factor, obviously. Bear in mind also how quickly can you get these kind of things out. Like if we think of print ad and then print cycles and make weekly or even monthly magazines, in days like now, like what I print today, in 4 weeks' time, it might be news from 3 years ago, figuratively speaking. So,
I will say, just to Lorraine, just added another point, but I think it really depends on your client as well. So sure, for delivered goods and products, it's quite funny. Somebody delivered a bunch of carrots recently, because hand delivered it, being socially distant, because they wanted to say, if you want organic vegetables, come to us. And then I've seen a couple of leaflets for cake shops in Hackney or wherever else. And so sure, depending on your client and what you want to communicate, some of those measures might make sense.
We've got to go very fast. We're tight on time, but yeah, I think scale of the campaign and budgets involved as well always play a role in everything as well. If you need to tighten up, then digital's usually the cheaper option, and so on. Very quickly, if you could go very fast, because we've got one other question after this. Many hospitality and tourism brands will be facing mass redundancies. How would you manage that message while still trying to encourage the public back? Could money spent PR be seen as wasteful if people are losing jobs? Unfortunately, PR is often one of the first things to cut back. My counter argument is marketing can generate money and commerce as well, and in order to keep people in jobs, you need to generate sales from marketing. But that's a biased perspective.
That's the theory, I think. Yeah, but in all reality, I can totally relate to it. I tried to touch on that point a little bit earlier on. Given the size of your organization, it might quite frankly have to be that marketing and or PR, especially if you outsource it, are one of the first things that have to go. Because if your key focus, if you're literally down to the wire and your key focus is on retaining your staff, then at that moment in time, you won't be, unfortunately, focusing on your marketing or PR strategy. However, there will always come the point where you need it back again. That is obviously if you make it, hopefully, through this pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult decision to make. We as agency owners, all three of us, we may not even understand fully the scope of the
well, my twin brother and my sister both have separate businesses, and without doubt, they've adapted new tactics. They've done a lot more digitally and so on, and without marketing, they wouldn't have sustained as well. They wouldn't have survived as well as they have.
So I think what Amy has basically said in the question is just a fact of reality, that of course there are going to be mass redundancies. We've seen that happen Even big restaurant chains have laid off thousands of people. We read about this every single day in the news, and it's also a fact of reality that PR and marketing is one of the first things that will always be cut. And so in some of our conversations with potential new clients recently, we've seen that actually their PR budget is massively kind of lean in comparison to previous years, but the client will actually understand that as part of their reopening strategy.
Yeah.
They need to communicate that they're open and safe. So I think, just to Amy's point, these are things that we are going to face every single day. As long as you're not spending 10 million on a huge advertising campaign, and you're doing things in a really streamlined way, I think there's a way to do that, with the right intention.
Yeah, a logical approach to ensuring being a bit more flexible and so on. Final question, and it's one of my favourite topics, the environment and climate change. Do you think the climate change agenda is even higher on the agenda now, even though people feel safer in their cars? It's from a PR from a train company.
I mean, actually, I think in terms of climate change, probably the last 4 months has been, great for the environment and world in terms of the fact that there are fewer, cars on the street. If you look at some of the, kind of global maps and, heat and pollution maps over, specific countries, around the world, big countries that normally create a lot of pollution, it probably actually has been, a great time for everyone to, reset, get back to nature. And so forth. But I think in terms of the climate change agenda, I mean, this is something that is really under, valued in general. If you look at, what happened with the US and, Paris, I think these things are really important and should be discussed. And obviously, kind of global, solutions will be an important part of, Davos and, climate change forums for many years to come. So I think, in general, COVID probably has been, a period where people can reset and actually take time to really think about what's important, what matters, whether it's in communication or whether it is, broader goals for the world and society. So I think, everyone should take lessons from this and apply them, as big and wide as they possibly can.
Yeah, I think that this is a good opportunity for the electric vehicle sector in particular, but when it comes to train companies and climate change and so on, I think it's essential that they need to be adapting their ticket offering and so on to encourage certain hours of travel and so on. So it's not all about rush hour and so on, and being a bit creative in how they're encouraging customers and convincing visitors as well. Providing consumer confidence. But I think a lot of it's not in terms of when it comes to the climate change and environment. I think there's a lot of organizations now really shifting their priorities in terms of what they're doing. And I think the transport sector also has a role. You look at Boeing, it's predominantly cost cutting, but they've just taken off the 747. They've stopped manufacturing that. So there's positive terms and positive sides in terms of carbon dioxide reductions and so on. Dom, any final points on?
I'm not going to add to that because I feel like a lot has been said, and we're probably
we're way over time.
Much.
Nothing to add. Well,
you said what I said.
Okay, right. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. It's been a really good turnout and an excellent discussion, and hopefully everybody's going to be prepared for what should anything come, and let's all be optimistic about the future and so on, and keep on going and keep being creative.